All right, today we're going to deconstruct a pretty popular video out there that's making huge claim, a historic economic victory for President Trump. Now, look, we're not here to get into the politics of it all. What we are going to do is break down the story it's telling. How it sets up the problem, what evidence it uses, and how it builds this powerful narrative for a political campaign. So let's just dive right in.
So the video kicks off with this. It's a really powerful claim. This isn't just some talking point, you guys. This is basically the thesis statement for their entire argument. When they frame it as one of the single largest economic victories, they're immediately setting the stakes incredibly high. They're basically giving you the conclusion right at the very beginning.
Okay, so here's the roadmap for the story this video is telling. First, it defines the so-called victory. Then it paints this really bleak picture of the economy to make that victory look even bigger. After that, it pulls out inflation data as the main proof, gives credit to a specific economic strategy, and then, you guessed it, connects the whole thing to political fallout and a future campaign story. Pretty straightforward.
All right, first up, let's really dig into how the video defines this record-setting victory. This part is absolutely crucial, because it's the foundation for the whole argument. Understanding the framing here is everything. So the source basically holds up this new economic report and says, here it is, irrefutable proof. The story they're spinning is that the data is so good, so strong, that it's a complete vindication of Trump's policies. And to really drive that point home, the video makes sure to mention that this news is so big, even media outlets that are usually critical just had to report on it. Okay, so to really make this victory seem huge, the video has to first paint a picture of how bad things were before, right? This is classic storytelling 101. You've got to show everyone the dragon before you can introduce the hero who slays it. You need the crisis before the solution.
And here's how they set the stage, with a really dramatic claim. The video says Trump inherited the single worst U.S. economies since the Great Depression. That is a powerful statement, and it's designed to do one thing: explicitly blame the whole situation on the economic policies of the Democrats who were in charge before. And to make that crisis feel real, tangible, the video zeroes in on one number, 9%. This is presented as the absolute peak inflation rate during the Biden era. It's the smoking gun, the key piece of evidence for why, as they put it, everything suddenly got so expensive. So that 9%, that becomes the villain of this whole story. It's the problem that desperately needs to be solved.
And that, of course, brings us to the big turning point in the video's story. The entire argument really hangs on this one thing: a brand new inflation report that, according to the source, completely changes the game. So the key thing to see here is the gap between what was predicted and what actually happened. The video makes a big deal about how economists forecasted a 3.0% inflation rate, right? But the actual number came in lower at 2.7%. Now, in this story, that's not just a tiny difference. It's framed as a major beat, a sign that the economy is doing way better than even the so-called experts thought it would. And to really hammer home just how surprising this was, the video pulls out this claim from an expert that not a single economist surveyed by Bloomberg got it right. Not one. That's a really powerful rhetorical move, right? It's used to frame the administration's policies as not just successful, but successful in a way that totally defied all the conventional wisdom. But they don't stop there. The video's expert then drills down even deeper. He argues that the really important number isn't the year-over-year rate. It's a more recent trend. He points to this, 1.6%. What is that? Well, it's the annualized core inflation from just the last 3 months. Basically, you take a short-term trend, project it out for a year, and you strip out the crazy prices for food and energy. The argument they make is that this number is the real sign of where the economy is going, and it suggests inflation is cooling off way faster than the big headline number lets on. Okay, so if the numbers are the big win, what or who gets the credit for it? Well, the video has a very clear answer for that. It all comes down to a specific economic philosophy. And the way they explain it is actually through a pretty simple analogy, something we can all relate to with our own finances. They contrast what they call a penny-pinching approach, cutting back, using coupons, not buying stuff, with a growth-based approach. So the big idea here is, instead of just tightening your belt, the strategy is to, quote, start making 2 times as much money by just revving up the whole economy. So how exactly do you rev up that economic engine? Well, according to the source, this is how it works. The video claims that you fuel the machine with tons of foreign investment, and you unleash the American energy sector. When you do that, it starts turning the gears of manufacturing and creating jobs, and the end result of that whole process, according to this narrative, is stable prices and a booming economy. That's what they say leads directly to things like lower gas prices, higher wages, and, you guessed it, those lower inflation numbers we just talked about.
And this is where the story pivots from economics right into the political arena. The video's argument is that this great economic story is having a really, really bad impact on the opposition.
For proof of that political fallout, the video points to this number, a net approval rating of -55 points for Democrats in Congress. Wow. And the source doesn't just frame this as a bad rating. No, they call it, and I'm quoting here, their lowest national approval ratings in all of recorded U.S. history. And just to give that number some extra weight, the analyst in the video adds some context. They point out that since this specific poll started back in the early 2000s, congressional Democrats have never, ever been in, quote, worse shape. And boom, that's how the video draws a direct line from its economic story to what it's calling a historic political collapse for the other side.
So, where does all of this lead? Well, it all builds up to the final piece of the video's argument, how this whole economic story gets packaged up and used for the 2026 midterm elections.
The analyst in the video boils the entire political game plan down to one simple but really powerful storyline. I inherited a mess, and I am fixing it. This is presented as the central message for the 2026 campaign. It's a classic story of crisis and rescue, something that's super easy for voters to grab onto. Of course, every good story needs a villain, right? And the video's analyst points out three main bad guys for the campaign trail. First, health insurance companies. Second, the congressional Democrats and their terrible approval ratings. And third, the biggest one of all, the alternative. That's basically a catch-all for a terrible economy, border issues, censorship, you name it. It's everything the campaign will define itself against. So there you have it. That's the step-by-step breakdown of how this video builds its entire argument. It takes economic data, mixes it with polling numbers, and weaves it all into a simple, powerful story of a crisis and a rescue. It gives you a villain, it gives you a hero, and it points directly to a future political win. But the real question we're left with after taking this all apart isn't just about whether the numbers are spot on. It's whether this kind of super carefully crafted story, this I inherited a mess and I am fixing it narrative, is powerful enough to actually shape how voters think and feel come 2026.